title of my talk has to do with religion and reason, really, and Satan and Goray. And really, there should be a question mark in there. Religion and reason, and Satan and Goray. So just to give you a minute or two of background on how I became involved in this, and maybe this will make the topic of the presentation easier to understand as well. So my background in Jewish studies scholarship is probably 60–70% Jewish thought and maybe 30–40% Jewish literature. I did my dissertation last year. I just finished in Jewish thought at JTS. But throughout my doctoral studies at JTS, I was concentrating both in Jewish literature and in Jewish thought. I ended up with doing a dissertation in Jewish thought, but I still haven't lost the interest in Jewish literature at all. I concentrated more so in American Jewish literature in terms of my Jewish literary interests, but also some European and some Yiddish Jewish literature as well. I can't claim to be a singer expert or a Yiddish scholar in any way, but I do like a lot of Singer's work, and I think there are some intriguing possible overlaps with Jewish thought as well. And one of the things that I was interested in my doctoral studies and continuing now in my postdoctoral work is trying to bridge the hemispheres between Jewish thought and Jewish literature, and I'm interested in cross-pollination between thought and literature, in comparative literature in general, in philosophy and theology in general, and in Jewish literature and Jewish thought specifically. And I thought that Singer's Satan Goray is an intriguing example here, because he's working in a Jewish thought milieu, to my belief, of one of growing reason in religion, the growing use of looking at religion from a rational standpoint. This, at least in European Jewish philosophy, is where the time Hermann Cohen has been, was in ascendance, and his disciple Franz Rosenzweig. Philosophers and thinkers trying to look at religion from a rational perspective and trying to portray Judaism as a rational religion. Trying to say that this Judaism that we had a shtetl that believed in a lot of myths and superstitions, that's not really the Judaism we want to portray to the world. The Judaism we want to present to the world is of a rational religion, a religion that can accord with the philosophy of Kant, and later Jewish philosophers tried to do this as well. One of Cohen's philosophical disciples, in some ways a philosophical disciple of his, but in other ways no, Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik, who was deeply influenced by Cohen in significant ways, tried to do this as well from the perspective of some neo-Kantian philosophy as well as existentialist philosophy, trying to say Judaism can be viewed from these philosophical rationalist Western lenses. So these are all currents happening roughly at Bashevis's era of writing. But when Bashevis writes arguably his most Jewish work, Satan and Goray, what is he doing? How is he portraying religion? How is he portraying the Jewish religion, Jewish Yiddishkeit specifically? Well, it's very interesting because it's not in this newfangled neo-Kantian way. It's not, as we all know, as a religion of reason. It's as a religion, I don't think we want to say quite superstition, but it's as a religion of mysticism. It's a religion that is more connected to certain strains of Jewish mystical thought than Jewish rational neo-Kantian thought. And how and why does he do this? The why question might be very interesting. I don't know if I'm qualified to answer as a non-singer specialist, really, non-singer scholar. I've heard different theories about his views on religion, such that his conception of religion is really non-rationalist. But in terms of the how, I think it's very intriguing to tie this into world literature and comparative literature, which is one of the big reasons that I'm here with you today, to bring Singer not only into a conversation with Jewish thought and Jewish philosophy, but with other streams of world literature. So if we look at some examples of how other writers, roughly of that era, were portraying religion and using religion in their novels and works, it wasn't exactly as a religion of reason either. Albert Camus, rough contemporary, an atheist thinker and writer, used elements of fear and dread in his portrayal of religion. If you look at his great work, La Peste, Plague, which has really become a lot more popular since COVID-19, arguably was the most relevant novel of the pandemic. When he did bring in religion in the novel, when he does bring in religion in the novel, it's not in this rationalist neo-Kantian manner. The most outstanding example of his use of religion in the novel is the sermon of Père Panelou, of Father Panelou. It emphasizes not a rationalist knowledge of God, not this Maimonidean kind of trying to figure out the essence of God in a rationalist way, but this very overwhelming dread and fear of God. Dans l'immense range de l'univers, le plus implacable bat avec les mains jusqu'à ce que la terre soit séparée du crâne. This God who is beating down the sinners, and he brings in Lucifer in his sermon. He brings in these horrible visions of hell and punishment to Sodom and Gomorrah, the suffering of Job, to try to curse the sinners, to try to get his congregants to repent. So this is a very dreadful, fear-inducing view of religion. Another outstanding example of the era roughly a little bit before is Robert Louis Stevenson, who grew up in a different milieu than Camus, not a Catholic milieu, but a Calvinist Protestant milieu, but also when he discusses religion in his outstanding, arguably religious work of fiction, The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, uses this conception of religion as well. In Stevenson's world, religion conjures the Gothic, conjures terror, dread, not just wonder, awe, mystery, but elements of horror. And this, I believe, is the way that that Singer is using religion in Satan and Goray, where it's not just about Kabbalists and mystics and about Sabbateans, but it's a force of horror as well. It's the Kol Nidre being chanted, where the air is full of ghosts who can find no resting place, where there are sounds that seem to come from below the earth during this chanting of Kol Nidre. And of course, he uses his elements to foreshadow later demonic possessions. But even in the Kol Nidre itself, religion is conjured as a force of not only mysticism but horror. The Yom Kippur robes, how he portrays them, he describes those who wear them as looking like corpses in shrouds. And discussing Aseret Yemei Teshuvah in the chapter of Rachel Lublin, days during Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, he starts even there mixing in elements of horror as well, or a wrinkled face, stiff as a corpse, her chin pointing up, her eyeballs turned back. And this is a tradition not only going on not only beginning in this era in world literature, but it dates back to arguably to Don Quixote and some of the ways that Cervantes discusses religion in Don Quixote. Detrás de la cruz está el diablo, mixing in the devil into religion very clearly. And the most obvious example is Dante's Inferno. But this is a theme in religion and literature that keeps coming up in world literature through the 20th century, through Singer as well, through the works of Thomas Mann in The Magic Mountain, where the religious Jesuit character Leo Napta's apartment is described as innig schreckhaftes, profoundly frightening. He has a piece of religious art in his apartment that is a vollen Schrecknis, highest horror, that causes Hans Castorp to exclaim, das ist schrecklich gut, it's frighteningly good. So these elements that come up again in religion and literature since Dante and Cervantes, continuing through Stevenson, Mann, and Camus, are the elements that Singer uses most prominently when writing his most prominent religious novel, Satan and Goray. So Singer really here is, even though he is a Jewish writer, my reading of him, at least in Satan and Goray, is that he is more influenced and more in league with the world of comparative and world literature than he is with Jewish thought and Jewish philosophy at this time.